This week and next, we're going to take a look at a bizarre question that was posed to Jesus in Mark chapter 12 and examine a practice that seems very strange to us today but was not considered strange at the time of the asking. Let's start off with a little context in Mark chapter 12, verse 18. This is from the ESV. And Sadducees came to him, who say there is no resurrection. And they asked him a question, saying, so let's take a look at this. Kai erkontai Saddukaioi pros autons. Kai erkontai, and they came. Who came? Saddukaioi, Sadducees. Notice there's no article. This is not the Sadducees, like an official delegation from a group or the leaders thereof. Just some Sadducees came. And where did they come? Pros auton, to him. Then we get the second part, hoitenes legusin, anastasin me enai. Hoitenes, who say, legusin, say, anastasin, resurrection, me enai, not to be. There is no resurrection. What do the Sadducees say? They say there is no resurrection. This is an infinitive of indirect discourse. We have a verb of communication, legosin, they say, followed by this anarthrous infinitive, anai. In this case, it's negated, me enai. And the object of the verbal action of the infinitive is resurrection, anastasin, right? So what is it that they say? They say there's no resurrection. That's pretty important. Their anti-resurrection stance is critically important regarding the question that they pose to Jesus. Let's carry on with verse 19. And here I've used my own translation because I really wanted to capture the feeling of the verbs. All the verbs in this verse are in the subjunctive mood and are dealing with sort of a hypothetical situation, and I don't want us to miss the thrust of the subjunctive, so that's why I've gone with my own translation here. Teacher, Moses wrote to us that if someone's brother should die, and if he should leave behind a wife and should not leave a child, the surviving brother should take his wife and should raise up seed, plural, for his brother. There's a lot of shoulds in there, right? And the reason for all those shoulds is that subjunctive mood. I really want to make sure that we don't miss that. So let's take a look at this in Koine, where we're not going to dig apart too much of it. I just want to point out all those verbs so that we can see the third class condition that we're given in the subjunctive and the subjunctive apodosis as well. So diving in, eontinos adelphos, if someone's brother, then we get the first verb, apothane, should die in the subjunctive, aorist active, subjunctive, third person singular. If he should die, who should die? The brother of someone. Kai katalipe gunaika, and he should leave behind a wife. Kai me afe teknon, and he should not leave a child. Then we get to the apodosis. Notice that hina labe ho adelphos autu. His brother should take, or he should take his brother's tain gunaika wife, and ex anastase, and he should raise up sperma, seeds, plural, to adelpho autu, for his brother. So, what's the condition, the third class condition? If someone's brother should die, and he should leave behind a wife and should not leave behind a child, then what's the condition? What's he supposed to do about that? He should take that wife to himself and should raise up seed, plural, children, offspring, for his brother. We're getting the description of Leverate marriage, the notion that it's a tragedy. It's a familial tragedy for someone to die without an heir, for a male particularly to die without an heir, because the family line dies with him. So Leverate marriage says the nearest brother should take that wife and marry her himself. But it's a marriage not to raise up his own family, not to build up his own family, but to produce an heir for his deceased brother. Yes, that's not possible, right? We understand that. It's not really his brother's child, but if you make the decision sort of like adoption, where a child becomes your child through adoption, Leverate marriage says, we're going to produce an heir for my deceased brother, despite the fact that he is no longer able to procreate, and that heir will carry on in his name, inherit his property, continue the lineage for generations to come, hopefully, right? So that's what we're talking about, Leverate marriage. It's a bizarre thing for us in our modern context, the idea that you would marry your sister-in-law. I'm not even going to make a comment on certain political families in the United States today and taking up with one's widowed sister-in-law. You can make that joke for yourself. Let's focus on Leverate marriage in the Bible. You've heard of Onan in Genesis chapter 38, I hope, and you've probably heard the term onanism. In an often abused text, we take the story of Onan and his duty to the widowed Tamar to produce heirs for his brother and let the line continue. And we read about Onan that he did take Tamar to wife, and he did sleep with Tamar, but he deliberately ensured through coitus interruptus that he could not produce an heir with Tamar, because we're told he knew the child wouldn't be his, it would be considered his deceased brother's child. And we have a term in English called onanism that's used to describe any sort of male climax with the intention of deliberately preventing the procreative act. No procreation will come from this male climax, and we call that onanism, and it's condemned widely in religious circles by different sects and different groups. But the issue at hand wasn't pleasuring oneself. The issue was not living up to this duty for Leverate marriage. Onan took Tamar into his household. He took Tamar into his bed. He exploited her sexually, but he never had any intention of living up to his responsibility to produce an heir for his dead brother. So this becomes problematic because he's dishonoring the brother and he's exploiting Tamar for his own gratification and his own sort of greediness. If the child won't be mine, there won't be a child. And he violates the tenets then of Leverate marriage. That's what we're dealing with here. So that sets the table for the question. Remember, the Sadducees, some Sadducees came to Jesus, and what do we know about them? We know they don't believe in resurrection, and they quoted Moses. Moses wrote to us that there's a duty for a man whose brother dies and leaves behind a wife but leaves behind no child. What is that duty? The duty is to take that wife as his own and to produce heirs, to produce children for the deceased brother, so his lineage will continue, so that the family tree, so that branch of the family tree doesn't end there. That's the duty. Now we come to the question that they asked Jesus. They set the table by quoting Moses. The authority here is the law of Moses. Now we get to their question. Verses 20 through 23. This is from the ESV. There were 7 brothers. The first took a wife, and when he died, left no offspring. The second took her and died, leaving no offspring. And the third likewise. And the 7 left no offspring. Last of all, the woman also died. In the resurrection, when they rise again, whose wife will she be? For the 7 had her as wife. So notice 2 things about their question. First and foremost, their question presumes the acceptance of Leverate marriage to an absurd degree, right? They say, not only did this happen once, not only did it happen twice, with the 7 brothers, all 7 brothers down the succession took this same woman to wife, but none of them produced an heir. And then they say, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be? Because she was married to all of them at some point through the succession. Which one will be her husband in the resurrection, seeing that she had been married to all 7 of them? So what's the issue? The issue is resurrection and whose wife she will be in the resurrection, having been married to all 7. But what do we know about the askers of the question? The primary thing that we were told about them is they say there is no resurrection. So what? What's the point then? If they say there is no resurrection and they ask such a resurrection-dependent question about a practice decreed in the law of Moses, we can assume that the question is false. It's a very complex question. It's a very intricate scenario that they've described. But because they don't believe in resurrection, we have to understand that the question isn't an honest one. At its best, if we take it at its best, they're probably trying to show that if Jesus accepts the premise, he believes in resurrection, and he's prepared to accept this absurd scenario, right? Can she be married to all 7 brothers? How do you decide which? Is it the first? Is it the last? Is it the one who loved her the most? How do you make this decision? It's an absurdist scenario, and it makes, if Jesus answers it on its face, he seems a little silly. At its worst, if he turns around and he says, this scenario is ridiculous, he's taking issue with what? With the law of Moses, because they started by saying, Moses wrote to us, if a man should lose his brother, leaving behind a wife but leaving behind no child, right? This is the law of Moses. To dispute the scenario is to take issue with the law of Moses and condemn himself as a teacher. They open up by saying teacher, didaskale in the vocative. Teacher, Moses wrote this to us. So how did Jesus reply? Well, we're going to look at that in next week's Koine Corner. So these get released on Sunday. Today we're looking at the first part. A week from today we'll look at the second part. But let's talk about the context of what we've looked at today. Leverate marriage, considered gross in our modern Western context in most cases. Most of us would think that the idea of marrying your sister-in-law is a little gross. In the biblical context, this was a way to honor and preserve the lineage of your family. Whether that is gross to you or not is not at issue. The question is how was it processed by the speakers and hearers and the intended audience in the Gospels for this interaction between the Sadducees and Jesus. The one thing that I know for sure is that the story makes me glad that I'm an only child. I hope that was good for you. I'll see you next week for the reply of Jesus to the Sadducees and their very intricate, complex question about Leverate marriage and the resurrection, even though they don't believe in resurrection. Until next time, Karas Kairene Humin, grace and peace to you.